So we've talked about quadratics before. We've graphed parabolas and we've looked at all the different characteristics that a parabola has: vertex, max, min, AOS. Now we're going to be looking at how to find the zeros of a quadratic function. So please make sure you're taking fantastic notes and you are following along. Now when I talk about the zeros of a function, I'm talking about where does my function achieve the value x equals 0. Now when I say x equals 0, you should be thinking x-intercepts, right? So these are the locations that the parabola will achieve the value x equals 0. So these are called the zeros of my function. Now there's many names for this. They're called the solutions to the equation. They are the zeros of the functions. They're also called the roots. So don't let these vocabulary words, confuse you. They all mean the same thing. At what value, what x value, does my y equal 0? So those are these coordinates. Now we're going to be looking at many different methods of finding this, but today we're just going to do graphing. Now once we find our zeros, there's different ways to write my answer. Now the first way is set notation. So set notation uses the sets, the brackets here, okay? So set notation uses these brackets to bracket in my answer. So my answer would be the set of these numbers, okay? Now it's very important that you do not use parentheses, because if let's say my answers were 2 and -2, and I would write them in a set. If I write 2, -2 with parentheses, that does not mean the same thing. These two things are not equivalent statements, okay? Because this right here means the point, the coordinate point x, y, x being 2, y being -2. So that's not what I want at all. So please make sure that if you decide to use set notation, you do not do this, that you use the brackets. Now you can do that, or you can just simply say, well, x equals 2 or x equals -2. Now again, there's still some things you need to be cautious of here because you have to put the or. And you do have to write x equals, okay? So the or needs to be there, and you need to write x equals, I do not want to receive any of this. I don't want to see that at all. And please make sure you put the or in between. I don't want to get any answers that look like this. Okay? Because a little comma there to me means and it's not and, it's or. One or the other. X is there or x is there. It's not in two places at once. Alright, so there's many ways to find the zeros of a quadratic. Today we're just going to look at graphing. So here I have a graph of the function y equals x squared minus 4x minus 5, and I want to know where the zeros are. Now remember, that just means where does my parabola hit the x-axis? Well, that's going to be here at 5 and here at -1. So if I wanted to write the answer to this question here, what are the zeros of this function? I would say the zeros are -1, 5, with the brackets, or x equals -1 or x equals 5. So either one of those would be correct ways to write my answer to this question. So you're just looking for where does the parabola hit the x-axis. Alright, so same question here. I want to find the zeros. So where does my graph hit the x-axis? Well, here's my x-axis. Here's my function. Where do they intersect? They don't, right? They don't intersect. So the correct way to answer this question would be, what are the zeros? There's no real zeros. Okay? No real zeros to this function. And yes, we do have to use the word real because there's actually imaginary solutions. Therefore, we have to state no real zeros. All right? The real is important. And please don't tell me no solution or NA or anything like that. Please be specific, no real zeros. And as we learn more vocabulary words, you might be able to say no real roots. But for now, please just stick with no real zeros. Alright, so now we're going to be looking at a quadratic function, and we're going to try to find the zeros by graphing. So hopefully we remember how to graph a quadratic. We have to identify A, B, and C. So A is 1, B is -6, C is 8. If you don't quite remember, you want to get your notes out on when we graphed quadratics, which was section 4.2. Alright, so now to find the vertex, remember we do negative b over 2a. So that's negative 6 over 2 times a, which is 6 over 2. So the x-coordinate of my vertex is going to be 3. To find the y-coordinate, I go ahead and I plug in. So that's going to be 3 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 8. 9 minus 18 plus 8. So simplifying that, 9 minus 18 gives me negative 9. Negative 9 plus 8 gives me a negative 1. So my vertex is at 3, negative 1. So I'm going to go ahead and graph my vertex. 3, negative 1. And remember, to find the rest of the coordinates of my graph, I pick points close to the vertex. So I'm going to make a little T-chart here. If I'm at 3, let's go ahead and pick 4 and 5. So now you're going to plug in x equals 4 into your function. So when I plug in 4, I get 0. And now you plug in 5. And evaluate, and we get 3. So I'm going to go ahead and plot these points. 4, 0, and 5, 3. And remember, we have to do our AOS, and our AOS is going to be right here at the x-coordinate of my vertex. So x equals 3 is my AOS. And I'm going to take all of my points and reflect them over the AOS. So that point is 2, 0. And then I get this point up here, 1, 3. Connect my dots here. Now, where are the zeros on my function? Okay, so remember that was the question we were being asked. Well, they're where my parabola hits the x-axis, so these 2 points, and that's at x equals 4 and x equals 2. So my solution here would be x equals 4 or x equals 2, or set notation 2, 4. Now, remember, these are zeros of my function, which means when I plug them into my function, I need to get 0, right? And that's what happens. When we plugged in 4, we got 0. So if I plug in 2, I better get 0 also. So you can always check your work here. Your turn. Please find the zeros of these functions and put it in your Google form. All right, I want you to also complete these 2 questions. So you're going to graph to find zeros. Please put your answer in the Google form, and I will also be checking for these graphs in the notes.